Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to the Tinker-Nave second panel on field research in Latin America. Thank you for joining us today. We will proceed with our 4 presentations. Each speaker will have between 10 to 12 minutes, and we will reserve time at the end for questions and comments. Before we begin, I would like to thank again the Tinker Foundation on behalf of LASIS for its continued support, which makes it possible for you and other students to conduct field research in Latin America and the Caribbean. So next, we will hear from Tomás Pino, PhD student in history. His presentation is titled Mutual Aids, Self-Management, and Anti-Capitalism in the Anthropocene. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here. Today I will present you the results of this archival research in the Biblioteca Social Reconstruir in Mexico City. So firstly, thank you. This is a kind of preview. Firstly, I will talk briefly about my own background and why I'm working with this. Then the historical context, research questions, moving to the primary source analysis, some important components of my own literature review, and then about my own experience in Mexico City. So about me, well, I did my bachelor's and my master's in history at the University of Chile, where I came from. And since my master, I was really interested in this Anthropocene phenomena. So what I did in my master thesis in Chile, okay, what is this concept about? What is the Anthropocene about? So I started with doing a kind of conceptual history of the term Anthropocene, how this concept emerged, in which context, when the concept of the Anthropocene started to circulate into different disciplines. But next, and that's why I'm here in Wisconsin right now, is like, okay, but what happened with the responses of the Anthropocene? Who is responsible from the Anthropocene? And what are the specific responses of the Anthropocene in Latin America from the radical social movements? Here is like the front matter of my thesis in Chile and the table of contents. And well, right now, about my research here in Madison, well, the historical context, on the one hand, is this Anthropocene debates about the human impact in their system, and once this discussion emerged at the beginning of this century, the following discussions were, okay, who is responsible from the current environmental crisis? What are some consequences of thinking in an anthropocentric era, discussed ontological dualism, what is the discussion between the human and the non-human division, the human and nature divisions, and what about the news experience of time? So what I found when I was doing archival research here in Mexico, when I was looking from my primary source, mostly anarchist magazines in Mexico City from the 90s until 2005, it's like, but the anarchist thought was already thinking about some of these issues that the Anthropocene debates tend to develop in the last years. And for me, that was really interesting. So that's why my research question was this one, like, why was Mexican anarchist thought, before the discussions that emerged from the Anthropocene, already discussing the human impact on Earth and the problematization of the ontological dualisms of human and non-human and nature and culture? That's why my argument, because this is part of my MA paper right now in Wisconsin, so I argue that owing to the epistemological flexibility of anarchist thought that has been present since its emergence in late 19th century in Europe, anarchism has long incorporated early reflections on the climate crisis and its potential responses. That's why my work right now is trying to make a parallel between the Anthropocene debates and then in which ways the anarchist thought was anticipating some of these concerns, right? So Now the next slide. As I said, my primary sources was mostly magazines from Mexico City, anarchist and anarcho-punk magazines from the middle of the 90s until 2005. And why this was important? Because I found like three main dimensions into this analysis. Firstly, the mutual aid. I don't know if you know Piotr Kropotkin, but Kropotkin is one of the most important anarchist thinkers from Europe. And he proposed a new way of understanding the relationship between human and other species as a critique from the Darwinist point of view. And then in Mexico City, regarding the discussions about veganism, vegetarianism, the anarchist thought in this period began to think, okay, how we can think in new ways on make a new relationship between human and non-human based on veganism, respect with other species, right? The second important dimension is about self-management. From the one of the core anarchist principles is the self-management as a principle of organization. And why is that important in Mexico? Because of the Mexican Revolution, in fact. Since that period with the figure of Ricardo Flores Magón, this Mexican anarchist, which was very important to discuss specifically the land use into the Mexican Revolution context, that is why from now, and also because of the indigenous people concerns in Mexico, that's why the land use is really important. So while the Anthropocene is discussing about social ecology, some important things about communalism, in the anarchist thought, I found, okay, these people was already discussing about some new ways of the land use in a more from a more anarchist perspective. And the third dimension was the anti-capitalism critique, very, very strong with this kind of magazines. This is the period of after the Cold War. So some anarchist movements in Mexico were discussing, okay, what's next? What's now since the Cold War ended? And what I found many critiques about some transnational industries, you know, in which way the consequences of the capitalisms are being more obvious in the global south, some kind of reflections in here. And with the Anthropocene, I found some important things about the capitalocene concept, a parallel concept of the Anthropocene, in which who is responsible from the Anthropocene? The development of the industrial capitalism, right? So, and then about the literature review, I'm trying to make a dialogue between three different theoretical frameworks. On the one hand, since my background is in intellectual history, if I want to reconstruct the anarchist thought, for me it's really important to understand the context of emergency of the anarchism, right, in Mexico. That's why one key author in here is Elias José Palti, an Argentinian historian who has this book, Misplaced Ideas, because my plan is not to make a kind of anachronistic analysis of the anarchist thought, with this comparison with the Anthropocene. Is mostly like, okay, why in this context of anarchist thought from the 90s to 2005, there are these discussions in a kind of parallel with the Anthropocene debates, right? Secondly, the responses of the Anthropocene from Latin America. There are 6 volumes of this book called The Handbook of the Anthropocene in Latin America. For me, this was really important to understand this kind of challenge. On the one hand, the Anthropocene challenge or kind of planetary boundaries, but on the other hand, we have also this kind of regional responses to the Anthropocene, and I think this book made that dialogue in a very good way. And thirdly, about anarchism in Mexico. There are several books, but I choose this of Kelly Hernandez, but Mexicans, because for me it was really important to understand the roots of the epistemic roots of the anarchist thought in Mexico, right? So then, as I said, here are my research results. So as I said, making this kind of comparison throughout all my paper, you know, okay, the Anthropocene is discussing this, what was happening in Mexico, multi-species history, mutual aid. Then, as I said, social ecology, and then the anarchist self-management. And throughout this constant comparison into my paper, I am trying to demonstrate in which way the anarchist thought was already discussing some of these key components that I found in the Anthropocene debate, right? So then, the next slide. About my experience in Mexico City, as I said, I was working in the Biblioteca Social Reconstruir in La Raza in the north side of Mexico City. But at the same time, I was studying at the summer school in the Colmex, in el Colegio de México. The name of that summer school was Concepto Iberoamérica Historia Conceptual. Why is this important? Because on the one hand, I was dealing with the research, with the archival research, but at the same time, I was thinking theoretically about my own theoretical framework. So my challenge was to put in dialogue these two kind of work at the same time. And that's why some of my challenge were at the first time distance, because the biblioteca was in the north side of Mexico City and the Colmex in the south side. So each day, 1 hour and a half. So that was challenging. And also, this information wasn't in the official webpage of the biblioteca, but the former archivist passed away due to the pandemics, to the COVID pandemics. And that was bad because the current archivist only opened this biblioteca 2 hours a day. And I was planning to work the whole day. So 2 hours a day, you can imagine a lot of work, like a kind of a speed run, working with the magazines. So that was the big challenge. Here I was the last day in the biblioteca. Well, yeah, as I said, I also was in the Colegio de México, and I also was in the UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. I went to the Che Guevara Auditorium. I don't know if you know this auditorium, who some some people is now living in there, but I had the chance to talk with him because I want to be respectful with him. I didn't put any photo in here, but I also was working with them. So, and finally, what's next? Firstly, I need to prepare my prelims list right now. Why is this important? Because one of my co-advisors is Jorel Melendez Vadillo. He's well known for his contributions into the anarchist thought in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm preparing my prelims list based on my research about anarchist thought. And then my other plan is to move into other anarchist archives throughout Latin America, Biblioteca José Ingenieros in Argentina, El CEDINCI in Argentina too, Estallido Social Museum in Chile. So my plan is to work into the summer into these new archives. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomás, for your presentation. Our third speaker is Micaela Wensjoe, PhD candidate in Education Policy Studies. Her presentation is titled Teacher Development Policy Appropriation in Rural Peru. Welcome and thank you. Yo te paso, sí, una así.
Hi everyone. I'm Micaela. I'm a PhD candidate in Education Policy Studies here. I'm in my fourth year, like Rachel. And I also didn't make an about me slide,
No.
but I'm previously to coming here, I worked in education policy in Peru and then doing research also there. And I did my master's also in education policy and international educational development in Philadelphia. So yeah, so thank you for thank you to the support of this award. I was able to do some preliminary field work during the summer because this is going to be actually my dissertation, but I'm still in the early stages of that. This trip helped me a lot to refine some things going forward, and also to see what else it's important for me to see where to go next. So I plan next year to be there for a long time. So this is just preliminary work.
Mhm.
Okay, so a little bit of the context. My study focuses on teacher development policies, specifically in-service teacher development policies, which are for teachers that are already teaching. So in the last decades, you may know this, but there have been like a global really concern with the quality of teachers. And as a result of that, there have been also many initiatives, policies, programs, to address that. So if you look, like a quick look on the websites of organizations like the World Bank, the OECD, UNESCO, the Inter-American Development Bank, or these global organizations, you'll find many big ideas and strategies to improve the quality of teaching worldwide, and specifically in the global South, right? So also in many of the countries, there have been in the last decades also many new policies, reforms. And if you look at those, you'll see almost the exact same language as the ones you'll find in these global organizations' websites. So there is like a very uniform discourse around how to increase the quality of teachers. These are all like quote unquote evidence-based, like very big like impact evaluations behind them. This works, it works in these contexts. However, despite all of that, we have not been able to translate that to better learning opportunities for students, especially in the most marginalized schools. Specifically, I look at Latin America and rural areas in Latin America. So that's what motivates my study. And if you can go 2 slides, please. Yeah, and then we're gonna go back to this. Yeah, okay. So that's what motivates my study, and the concept I use is policy appropriation, which comes from the anthropology of policy scholarship, in this case, specifically the anthropology of education policy. And it challenges, in a way, this idea that a policy is designed, and if it's well designed and well implemented, then it should work, right? And if it doesn't work, then something happened in the middle, and we have to find the problem and fix it, right? And this concept of like the fidelity of implementation, that might be the problem, right? People didn't actually implement the policy the way it was supposed to. Policy appropriation examines how educational policies are interpreted, adapted, and reshaped by the actors that touch them within their specific contexts. So it's not the same artifact. The policy is not the same thing that travels exactly across places and people. So in my research question, the big one, because I have more specific ones, but I will imagine, how do teachers, principals, and officials from local, regional, and national education offices understand and appropriate teacher development policies in a Peruvian rural Amazonian region? With this question, I'm trying to understand how teacher development policies are actually understood and enacted at different levels of government in this location, how they are negotiated by educators and communities, and how they make sense of them and how they actually integrate them or not into their own realities. Can you go to the previous one, please? So this summer I went to Cayali, Peru, with the red arrow in the map. It's next to Brazil in the Amazon of Peru. Very diverse region, more than 20 languages are spoken there. 70% of schools are located in rural areas, and many are in very, very remote areas. Actually, some of them haven't been reached by anyone in the education system ever. Like, there are many schools that they told me, no, we just can't get there. Like, it's too remote. So we have no idea, like, who is there, the teacher, the students. So it's very challenging in terms of access. And just as a, I don't know, a piece of information, 52% of students finish school. But that can tell us many different things, but that's, that's something that I think it's a region that is constantly struggling with some of the, at least the indicators that the Peruvian government tracks. Okay, so for my methodology, I'm using a comparative case study, which allows us to look like at 2 or more cases to understand how and why something happens in different settings. Unlike a traditional case study, when you look at something in one case in depth, a comparative case study is designed to look across several places, levels, and moments in time. So it has a three-dimensional framework, which has a horizontal axis, a vertical axis, and a transversal axis. In my case, I made this. So in my case, the vertical axis is the comparison between local offices. It's how the government is organized in Peru. They have like the Ministry of Education, then the regional office in Ucayali, and then local offices. They have 4. I've been to 3. And then the schools. So comparison between local offices and between schools. Then the vertical axis in my case is how that policies travel between the national level, the regional level, the local offices, and the schools, and actually also the global discourse around teacher development, because as I mentioned, national policies are very, very influenced by those. And while my study is not longitudinal, there is also a transversal axis in terms of trying to understand or put all these analysis into context of situating teacher development reforms with longer histories of these communities, also previous experiences of the people I interview and I observe. So yeah, please. Okay, so I did 13 interviews this summer. I was there for over 2 months with officials from the regional office and 3 of the 4 educational offices. The 4th one is too hard to reach and too expensive, so I couldn't go. You have to fly. It's only 1 flight a week, and it costs a lot of money, and then you are not sure if you can come back. Or when, you eventually come back, but not, you know exactly when. So I couldn't go to that one, so I went to 3. I also did an observation, some pictures there, of a teacher training workshop organized by the Ministry of Education that gathered people from the regional office and from all the local offices. And I also did document analysis of mainly regional teacher development policy documents that they gave me or showed me, and I took pictures during our interviews. Yeah. So some thoughts after Peru. I didn't name these slide findings because, as I mentioned, it's still very preliminary, and it actually helped me, as I said, think about what comes next. But I do have some thoughts after the 2 months there, over 2 months there. So first of all, they have to deal with so many different policies and programs on teacher development. With one of my participants, we counted in the interview over 20 that at the moment she had to deal with. That's a lot, and most of them are not coordinated at all. So many, actually many come from the Ministry of Education because they have the rural education office, they have one. Then the bilingual, they also have one. The school management, they also have one. But then also NGOs, the regional office itself, religious organizations. So they have a lot, and they don't coordinate between them. So lots of great intentions and ideas and lots of money. But it's hard for them. And also they send mixed message. and they overlap. So for example, another participant was telling me, she told me that last week I was in a teacher training workshop in person and in another one online at the same time, both by the Ministry of Education. And the facilitator of the in-person workshop was telling me, please close the laptop. And they were like, and the online one was telling, please turn on the camera and mic. And she was like, oh my God, like it's so hard. This is not uncommon. She wasn't telling me that surprised or like, she was like, just that this happened last week, you know, like, so it's very hard for them to manage. So another thing is most of the times, all of these are seen or perceived as only partially relevant, if at all relevant, to the realities of rural schools in the Amazon. As I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of this is designed for the whole country, or for all the rural schools in the country, and they are very diverse. So what they do is they select what they think works. They completely ignore many of them. They adapt others, but the problem, at least for me, the problem I see is that what they give priority to, which is understandable, is those policies or programs that require like intensive reporting or are tied to accountability mechanisms. And those are usually the more like national level things, like training to increase test scores or training to, I don't know, fill these documents well. Yeah, or trying to have all the walls in the classroom with specific types of signs or things like that. Yeah, just one last idea. At the end, to teachers, the only thing that like really gets to them is what they call acompañamiento pedagógico, which is one person, because they are so remote. They can, like in the training I observed, there were like a couple of teachers, but mostly were officials from the offices, because they cannot go to the main city. So what gets to them is this acompañamiento pedagógico, which is a person going and actually doing coaching, teacher coaching with them. And they cannot, that is very hard for them to translate all these ideas and strategies and things into that coaching strategy. So at the end, I don't know how much actually gets to teachers. I'm gonna go to schools. That's my plan for next summer and the next fall, and see what's happening there. And this is all worse in bilingual intercultural schools, because they have more interventions, less resources. So I also want to go there and see what's happening. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. More questions? I have one on Zoom. Thank you very much to the organizers for this interesting event. I have a question for Tomás. He gave a very clear explanation on anarchism in the context of environmental crisis, as well as the questions Mexican anarchists raise on these issues. But I have a question about the Anthropocene. Could you explain how this concept emerged, and particularly what are the origins of the term Anthropocene? I believe that such an explanation will be very useful for a better understanding of this phenomenon. I think it's a broad question that you can give like a brief idea.
No, thank you very much for the person in Zoom. Yes, that's a good question. Firstly, we have some kind of semantic antecedents of the Anthropocene since the last part of the 19th century, like Anthropozoic era, Anthropogene, Anthropozoicum in the 80s with the Chernobyl disaster. So firstly, we can trace a genealogy of the term itself, but another question is, okay, but when the Anthropocene became a concept, right? That's the core question. And that was at the beginning of this century. What happened in 1980s? there was a geosphere-biosphere group which proposed a new disciplinary field called the Earth System Science, in which we need to trace the different components of the Earth, you know, the biosphere, the anthroposphere, so on. And what's happening? Because of the human impact in the balance of this system, the chemistry, Paul Crutzen, and the biologist Eugene Sterman proposed in 2000 the term Anthropocene to designate a new geological era caused by human impact. So that's like the beginning of this discussion. And what happened next, you know, this concept begin to circulate between different disciplines, moving to the Earth System Science to geology, and then into social science and humanities. But the key component of the emergence of the concept itself is the emergence of the Earth System Science as a field, right? Yeah.
So we are out of time. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the panelists for the research. I would like to invite you next Tuesday. Our lecture will be Peru's Operation Mercury and Bolsonaro's Brazil, Greenwashing and Toxic Assets in Latin America by Professor Ruth Goldstein. So hope to see you here. Thank you very much.